In the first lesson from Luke, as you listen to the story from Luke, consider what might have been Zacharias' motivation to climb the tree. Jesus entered Jericho and was passing through it. A man there was named Zacharias. He was the chief tax collector and was rich. He was trying to see who Jesus was, but on account of the crowd, he could not, because he was short in stature. So he ran ahead and climbed a sycamore tree to see him, because he was going to pass that way. When Jesus came to the place, he looked up and said to him, "Zacharias, hurry and come down, for I must stay at your house today." So Zacharias hurried down and was happy to welcome Jesus. All who saw it began to grumble and said, "He has gone to be the guest of one who is a sinner." Zacharias stood there and said to the Lord, "Look, half of my possessions, Lord, I will give to the poor, and if I have defrauded anyone of anything, I will pay him back 4 times as much." Then he said to him, "Today's salvation has come to this house, because he too is a son of Abraham. For the Son of Man came to seek out and save the lost." In the chapter of Windigo Footprints in Braiding Sweetgrass, Robin Walkimmer explains who the Windigo is in the Anishinaabe mythology. Okay. The Windigo is the legendary monster of the Anishinaabe people, the villain of a tale told on freezing nights in the North Woods. You can feel it lurking behind you, a being in the shape of an outsized man, 10 feet tall, with frost-white hair hanging from his shaking body. With arms like tree trunks and feet as big as snowshoes, it travels easily through blizzards of the hungry time, stalking us. The hideous stench of its carrion breath poisons the clean scent of the snow as it pants behind us. Yellow fangs hang from its mouth that is raw where it chewed off the lips of the hunger. Most telling of all, its heart is made of ice. Windigo stories are told around the fire to scare the children into safe behavior, lest the OBG boogeyman will make meal of them. Or worse, this monster is no bear or howling wolf, no natural beast. Windigos are not born, they are made. The Windigo is a human being who has become a cannibal monster. Its bite will transform its victims into cannibals too. Starvation in the winter is a reality for our people, particularly in an era of the Little Ice Age, when winters are especially hard and long. Some scholars suggest that the Windigo mythology also spread quickly in the time of the fur trade, when overexploitation of game brought famine to the villages. The ever-present fear of winter famine is embodied in the icy hunger and gaping maw of the Windigo. As the monster shrieked in the wind, the Windigo stories reinforced the taboo against cannibalism, when the madness of hunger and isolation rustled in the edge of the winter lodges. Succumbing to such a repulsive urge doomed the gnawer of bones to wander as the Windigo for the rest of time. It is said that the Windigo will never enter the spirit world, but will suffer the internal pain of need, its essence a hunger that will never be stated. The more the Windigo eats, the more ravenous it becomes. It shrieks with its craving, its mind a torture of unmet want. Consumed by consumption, it lays waste to humankind. But the Windigo is more than just a mystic monster intended to frighten children. Creation stories offer a glimpse into the worldview of people, of how they understand themselves their place in the world, and the ideals to which they aspire. Likewise, the collective fears and the deepest values of a people are also given in the visage of the monster they create. Born of our fears and our failings, Windigo is the name for that within us which cares more for its own survival than anything else.
It is the Windigo way that tricks us into believing that belongings will fill our hunger, when it is belonging that we crave. I have lots and lots of sentences and paragraphs underlined and bracketed in Braiding Sweetgrass. Some of them even have stars next to them. This sentence had 2 stars next to it. Back however long ago it was that I was putting this sermon series together, I realized that in this sentence was the kernel of what I wanted to preach on to conclude this series. This sermon series is titled Created as a Gift because during the season of creation, I wanted to encourage us to remember that creation itself is a gift and that we, as part of that creation, are part of that gift as well. That's why I talked about the practice of gratitude as a spiritual discipline that helps us see the sacred gift and to help us see the sacred gift in the mundane. It's why I talked about the idea that we have enslaved ourselves to an extractive economy from which God wants to free us. That's why I talked about how when our first thoughts are about what we can give to creation rather than what we can get or take from creation, we live in greater harmony with the gift that is creation. And that's why I talked about how when we recognize creation as a gift and respond to it with awe, we draw closer to the source of creation. Today, I want to talk about what we really crave and how easy it is to, if you'll allow the metaphor, to stuff ourselves with fast food that doesn't truly nourish us. Today, I want to talk about our craving for belonging and how too often we fill that craving with belongings. And I think the story of Zacchaeus and Jesus is a great way to do this. The story of Zacchaeus is one that we tell our kids. Kind of amusing that we don't have kids here today to tell it to. But we tell it to our kids because Zacchaeus was short, and kids know what it's like to be short. And we tell it to our kids because Zacchaeus climbs a tree, and kids like to climb trees. At least some kids do. And I think maybe they'll even identify with that desire to see Jesus. I get the motivation. I get why we teach this story to our children. And yet we miss what the story is really about when we do that. The story kicks off with a description of Zacchaeus. He is identified as a tax collector and as someone who is very rich. Later, Jesus refers to him as a son of Abraham, so we know that Zacchaeus is a Jew. There was only one way that a Jew could become a Roman tax collector: collaboration. It is safe to assume that his neighbors hated him and saw him as a traitor to their own people. That's why they called him a sinner. In the midst of the Roman occupation, there was only one way that a Jew could become rich. One had to play along with the Roman patronage game. Diana Butler Bass reminds us that in the lands that the Romans occupied, they offered some political positions at auction to local inhabitants. Tax collectors were the main agents of the patronage system. From a financial point of view, it was a good job. While governors ensured that peace and order flowed down from the emperor, tax collectors made sure that cash came up from the provinces to pay for that military and to make sure the elites in the imperial city got rich. Tax collectors guaranteed the empire worked and that its benefits reached those on the top. If you were a tax collector, you would get rich because you were allowed to take your skim of the profits as the money headed to Rome. However, those beneath you in social standing who paid the onerous amounts of tribute monies, they were going to hate you. And those above you who worried you might be taking more than your fair share distrusted you. For tax collectors, being unpopular was as certain as wealth. So, but you had the security of Caesar. That's how Zacchaeus got rich. He knew how to play the game. He was quite literally a climber. He had made it. He was not a wee little man, despite the song we teach our children. Zacchaeus was a big man, chief tax collector, Jericho. Yes, he was short, and that didn't change the fact that he was the BMIT, the big man in town. So why would the BMIT care about the arrival of an itinerant healer and preacher? Bass suggests that Zacchaeus might have seen Jesus as a threat. If Jesus was the Messiah, as rumor suggested, and he was going to send the Romans packing, which is what most people thought the Messiah was supposed to do, that would be bad for business. If Jesus just inspired rebellion, the Romans would clamp down, and that would be bad for business. If Bass is right that Zacchaeus' motivation was to protect the status quo, or perhaps we should say the status quid pro quo, then he needed to be aware of anything that would threaten his position. So he did what he always did. He got out in front of the others by climbing. This is not a charming children's story, Bass says. This is a story about the guy who cuts in line, cheats on tests, and stuffs the ballot box to become the class president. When Jesus passed the tree, he looked up and saw Zacchaeus. Able to read the hearts of people, Jesus did not see a jolly fellow tangled in sycamore branches. He saw Zacchaeus, an agent of the Roman overlords. When Jesus called him down from the tree, he was calling him to stand at the same level as everyone else. And then Jesus invited himself to Zacchaeus' house for dinner. That is a big reversal. Jesus was a lower status person and a good Jew. Lower status people never invited their superiors to a meal. The whole structure of society was based on elites doing favor to those beneath them to secure their loyalty. In normal circumstances, Zacchaeus might have invited Jesus to his house for dinner, but Jesus inviting himself to Zacchaeus' house? That doesn't happen. And if Zacchaeus had invited him and Jesus went, which is unlikely, well, then Jesus would have owed Zacchaeus a debt of gratitude and obligation to repay what had been extended to him. But Jesus undermined the whole tit-for-tat business by inviting himself to Zacchaeus' house. Jesus offered the gift of his presence to one who did not deserve it, and this made Zacchaeus not a benefactor, but a beneficiary. According to Roman practice, Zacchaeus owed Jesus something. So Bass thinks that it was out of this sense of obligatory gratitude that Zacchaeus promised to give away half of his wealth to the poor and to pay back all whom he had defrauded 4 times as much as he had skimmed. Ultimately, she says it would have been impossible to give back that much money. Zacchaeus promised to bankrupt himself. In effect, he resigned his position. There is no way Zacchaeus could have remained a tax collector. He got out of the tree, extracting himself from the pyramid scheme of debt and duty. And in response, Jesus proclaimed, "Today, salvation, healing, and wholeness have come to this house." Now, Bass may be right. Her socio-political and economic analysis are spot on. And her suppositions about Zacchaeus' motivation may have been what Luke intended us to get by telling this story. Still, I can't help but wonder if something else is going on here. Luke doesn't tell us what Zacchaeus' motivations were for wanting to see Jesus. But what if something else was going on? Suppose for a moment that Zacchaeus had already discovered that his riches weren't giving him what he truly craved. Suppose he had been tricked by the Windigo way and he thought that his belongings would fill his hunger. Only, even with all his riches, he realized finally that he was truly hungering for something different. What if he was ready to step away from the system that had demanded he fit in so he could get by? And what if he thought that Jesus might be the one to help him find the courage to step away? I picked this sermon theme today quite before Marilyn Singer and her posse picked Braving the Wilderness as an all-church read. But man, does that book fit. And who knows, it might end up becoming the basis of a whole sermon series. For now, let me share this one thought that echoes throughout the book from Brene Brown.
So shocked to learn in the research that the opposite of belonging is fitting in. Because fitting in is assessing a group of people and thinking, who do I need to be? What do I need to say? What do I need to wear? How do I need to act? And changing who you are. And true belonging never asks us to change who we are. It demands that we be who we are. Because if we fit in because how we've changed ourselves, that's not belonging. That's not belonging, because you betrayed yourself for other people. And that's not sustainable.
Maybe Zacchaeus realized that he had betrayed himself to fit in with his Roman overlords. Maybe Zacchaeus climbed the tree because he knew that Jesus could help him live into his authentic self, and in doing so, find true belonging. Maybe Zacchaeus' declaration that he was going to divest himself of his belongings was the step he thought or he felt he needed to take to free himself from the monster the Anishinaabe people called the Windigo. Jesus' declaration, today salvation, that is, today healing and wholeness, have come to this house, would equally apply to the idea that Zacchaeus was extracting himself from the pyramid structure of debt and duty, and to the idea that Zacchaeus was extracting himself from the maw of the Windigo. Those two are deeply related. Kimmerer reminds us the footprints of the Windigo are everywhere you look. They stomp in the industrial sludge of Onondaga Lake, and over a savagely clear-cut slope in the Oregon Coast Range where the earth is slumping into the river. You can see it where coal mines ripped off mountaintops in West Virginia and in oil-slicked footprints on beaches of the Gulf of Mexico. a square mile of industrial soybeans, a diamond mine in Rwanda, a closet stuffed with clothes, Windigo footprints all. They are the tracks of insatiable consumption. So many have been bitten. You can see them walking the malls, eyeing your farm for a housing development, running for Congress. We are all complicit. We've allowed the market to define what we value so that the redefined common good seems to depend on profligate lifestyles that enrich the sellers while impoverishing the soul and the earth. Oh, there's so much more to say about belonging, and perhaps I will preach a sermon series on that topic at some point. There's so much that I've left on the cutting room floor just for today's sermon. For now, let me come back to where I started. It is the Windigo way that tricks us into believing that belongings will fill our hunger, when it is belonging that we crave. Opening ourselves to our authentic self is one important step to banishing the Windigo from our lives. Another is truly accepting each other as each is in all of our authenticity. I think Jesus wants us to do both.